When looking at the state of the world today, I find myself teetering between hope and despair, sometimes daily, sometimes for what seems like minute to minute. In my job as an organizer and communications manager for the activist group March on Harrisburg, I'm faced every day with the corruption in our state government that privileges the powerful and the wealthy and leaves 99% of Pennsylvanians out in the cold, especially those who are poor and low wealth. We've been fighting for 5 years just to make it illegal for lobbyists to bribe our legislators. But legislators love their gifts, and many, as we've heard, pay their mortgages with these perks, so it isn't an easy fight. A couple of months ago, a group of us from March on Harrisburg interrupted a private breakfast fundraiser for State Senate President Jake Corman. And when one of my colleagues, Rabbi Michael Pollack, confronted a room full of lobbyists and politicians about their corruption and began to talk about the devastation of child poverty in Pennsylvania, we were shouted at and told to get the bleep out. The level of callousness so boldly and proudly displayed is pretty much on par for the course and makes it easy to fall into despair about the world. It makes me question if things will ever really change. In my work for the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign, it's impossible to look away from the interlocking injustices that keep so many of us divided, sick, and feeling disempowered. Systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism and the war economy, and the false narrative of religious nationalism. The Poor People's Campaign just released its pandemic report, and it's sobering to say the least. It found that in the US, the pandemic was debilitating, resulting in an estimated 1.2 million increase of people living with disabilities, totaling 1 in 4 adults with disabilities in the United States. All faced inaccessible and inadequate healthcare resources during the pandemic, as well as higher rates of unemployment and overrepresentation in low-wage positions. The US ranked well below other advanced economies on measures of happiness and well-being, ranking number 16 globally in the 2022 World Happiness Report. Additionally, the US ranked number 32 in the latest SDSN Sustainable Development Report, with poor performance on inequalities, education, health outcomes, responsible consumption, and production and insecurity. Before the pandemic, there were approximately 140 million poor and low-income people in the United States, accounting for over 40% of the population and including more than half of the children in the country. Nearly half of all renters were rent-burdened in the US. 9% of the people did not have health insurance, with wide variations by racial and ethnic groups. 22% of Native American people, 20% of Hispanic people, 11% of Black people, 7.8% of white people, and 7.2% of Asian people did not have health insurance in 2019. These pre-existing disparities in healthcare access, wealth distribution, and housing insecurity yielded disastrous effects once the pandemic hit the US. COVID-19 compounded these gaps in access and delivery, creating a public health emergency that caused increased harm to populations based on their class, race, gender, geography, and ability. So there are days when the bad news like this feels overwhelming, our progress feels far too slow, and the darkness feels like it may never end. But there are things that keep me going and keep me doing the work. My UU community, the good hearts and the good work of the volunteers I work with every day, through March on Harrisburg and the Poor People's Campaign, the strength and support of my friends and my husband, the unconditional love from my cats and my dog, and hope. Hope is a big one. Without a very real, albeit very tenuous hope that change will occur, even if not in my lifetime, I feel I would sink into despair. So when a UU friend that I've come to know and respect at seminary recommended reading a book called Embracing Hopelessness, written by Dr. Miguel de la Torre, who is a professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver, I was very intrigued, but wary. I wasn't keen on inviting hopelessness into my life when I've worked so hard to keep it at bay, but I gave the book a go, and it left me pondering with a lot of questions. De La Torre has a unique and challenging take on hope and hopelessness. Talking about hopelessness can be uncomfortable and challenging, but I invite you to lean into any discomfort you may find yourself feeling. De La Torre is not big on hope because he believes hope can be used by those with privilege to excuse inaction. And I believe he has a point. He writes that hope as false consciousness leads to complacency with the oppressive status quo and breeds apathy. To hope is to bury one's head in the sands of peace, making us useless to meet the inevitable struggle that is coming. Too much hope, and we're not driven to make change. Hope, I believe, becomes a real problem when it goes into overdrive and becomes toxic positivity. Toxic positivity can be defined as the excessive and ineffective overgeneralization of a happy, optimistic state across all situations. The process of toxic positivity results in the denial, minimization, and invalidation of the authentic human emotional experience. I've personally seen a lot of toxic positivity online in self-help spaces, but it's also a problem in the realm of activism. Writer Toni Russell has written about her experience on social media as a Black woman. In 2020, on a day when she was exhausted, saddened, and infuriated by the constant media attention around the gratuitous killing of Black people, she went on Facebook. It was a mistake. So imagine how I felt, she writes, when I read a Facebook post that said these exact words. We have some racists, but 99.95% of the people you meet are colorblind and don't have a racial bone in their body. We have some bad cops, but 99.995% of the law enforcement personnel you encounter would risk their lives to save yours. If you choose to see evil, then evil is all you'll see. As for me, I choose to see the good in people. My heart is full. I've got nothing but love for all of you. This is toxic positivity, and it can be, as it was here, actively harmful. Getting toxic positivity in response to conversations about racism, writes Russell, can lead to questioning your own reality, feeling invalidated, or trying to shut off your emotions because of shame. But hope doesn't have to veer off into the land of toxic positivity to negatively affect those who are oppressed. De La Torre suggests that hope can cause those who are oppressed to become complicit in their own oppression. The disenfranchised often refuse to resist oppressive structures for the sake of survival or the desire to protect their loved ones. And there is danger of falling into the trap of thinking that as long as hope exists, I might survive forces geared for my destruction. I just have to keep my head down and my voice muted. All of this, De La Torre says, calls for embracing hopelessness. This hopelessness is not a product of despair, but must be understood as desperation, a desperation rooted in the hope denied. When people are desperate, says De La Torre, they will do whatever it takes to change the situation because nothing is left to lose, even if it means crossing a desert. The Latin root for desperate suggests a hopelessness that leads to action, at times reckless action, brought about by great urgency and anxiety. It is not hope that propels people to the desert where more often than not death awaits. It is desperation. How many deserts would you cross to feed your children, regardless of the risks involved? Asked De La Torre. Hopelessness is an act of courage to embrace reality and to act even when the odds are in favor of defeat. Only at this critical junction of desperation, rooted in the now, is there a possibility for revolutionary change whose consequences might impact the future. UU Reverend Elizabeth Nugent agrees with De La Torre, saying that embracing hopelessness frees us all. We no longer have to do the mental gymnastics to try and create hope out of the suffering we're seeing every day. If all is lost anyway, we can stop clinging to a fragile, impossible hope. We can stop denying what we see with our eyes and feel with our hearts and struggle for justice like we have nothing to lose because all is already lost. Black author and feminist Roxane Gay also makes a case against hope in an opinion piece in the New York Times. She writes about difficult subjects, and because of this, she says that people wondering, now what, often ask her about hope. She says, they want me to offer assurances that though we're facing many challenges, everything will be okay. The world will keep on turning. It's very seductive, this hope that people yearn for. But Gay doesn't traffic in hope, opting instead for realism, because she believes hope allows us to leave what is possible in the hands of others, when so much of that possibility is actually in our own hands, if we choose to participate in the political process. I agree with Gay, but believe the answer is more than just participating in the political process. De La Torre poses what he calls an ethic para joder. Forgive the Spanish, it's a swear, the last one is a swear word, so, and forgive my pronunciation, which might. So this is an ethic that screws with the prevailing power structures. And that's a translation, so. Sorry. It's his words, so I'm using it. And it creates instability, upsetting the prevailing social order designed to maintain the law and order of the privileged. He believes this instability could lead some within the dominant culture to share in the hopelessness of overcoming the global neoconservative and neoliberal forces, creating an opportunity for change. Screwing with the prevailing power structures is something we do really well at March on Harrisburg. We force the oppressor to confront those who they are oppressing. We enter their sacred spaces and expose their backdoor dealings. And like De La Torre predicts, they show fear because they are accustomed to their power and privilege and feel it being challenged and beginning to slip away. So many of us you used in this room are engaged in social justice work in our own ways. I encourage us all to really examine our own theologies of hope and hopelessness. Are we using hope to give ourselves a pass on doing the hard work of creating an equitable and just world that upholds the inherent worth and dignity of every person? How does pushing into hopelessness feel? Could it be empowering? I'm personally exploring these questions and challenge you to do the same. Now to close, I'll share the following from De La Torre's writing. In ethics, para joder is a liberative praxis by which we learn to transform society for the better, even though the ultimate utopian goal may never be realized. Nonetheless, we strive forward, not because we hope to succeed, because we won't. We move forward towards justice because we have no other choice if we wish to define ourselves as humans. We strive forward because in the crucible of struggle, we construct our identity and define our purpose in life. And even if you still want to insist on the existence of some utopian hope, then maybe, just maybe, it may be found only when one takes a stand and says, screw it. May it be so.